Two alien princes, heirs to a galactic empire, vanished from their crystalline fortress. Their mother, a 7-foot-tall queen in living armor, roared in fury as search teams found only abandoned toys and the scent of fear. Then they discovered the boys, asleep on the chest of a human mercenary, a stranger from Earth. This single moment would shatter centuries of royal protocol and force a collision between alien tradition and human pragmatism. The silence in the royal nursery felt heavier than any alarm. Queen Cirella's security systems had never failed before. Not once. Every crystalline wall should have pulsed with defensive energy. Every floor panel should have registered the slightest pressure change. Instead, the silence just sat there, unbroken. Guards found the room unoccupied except for scattered toys. A small hover sphere still drifted near the ceiling, its lights blinking in a lazy pattern. The air held the sharp scent of childlike fear, that particular acrid note that clings to the back of the throat. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. Just empty space where two royal heirs should have been sleeping. The fortress itself appeared untouched. Its crystalline structure showed no fractures, no energy signatures from weapons or tools. The breach hadn't triggered a single defensive protocol. The motion sensors remained quiet. The thermal scanners showed nothing but ambient heat. It was as if the princes had simply dissolved through solid matter. Ancient court protocols snapped into place immediately. The entire fortress went into full lockdown. Every passage sealed. Every energy field activated at maximum strength. Suspicion fell on all outsiders first. Diplomats, traders, even allied species representatives. The Queen's orders were clear and cold. Find her sons. Secure the fortress. Trust no one. Search teams moved through the bioluminescent corridors with controlled urgency. Their boots made no sound on the glowing floors. They scanned every alcove, every maintenance shaft, every hidden chamber known to security. Their movements were precise, disciplined, but their eyes showed the strain. They knew what failure meant. This wasn't just about losing royal children. The prince's disappearance threatened the entire stability of the Aeolian Empire. Their capture could mean hostage negotiations. Their death could mean immediate war with multiple systems. Every guard understood the weight. Disgrace would be the least of their punishments. The complete lack of evidence pointed to only two possibilities. Either someone had achieved impossible stealth, penetrating the most secure location in the galaxy without leaving a trace, or the threat came from within. Someone inside the fortress had betrayed them, someone with high-level access and knowledge of security bypasses. They found the boys in a secondary storage chamber 3 levels down. The two young princes were curled against the chest of a human male, sleeping peacefully. The man sat propped against a crate, one arm resting protectively across both children. His eyes were open, watchful, but he made no move to stand or explain. The scene made no sense by any measure of royal security. The human was an outsider, a species viewed with deep suspicion by Aeolian tradition. He shouldn't have been able to access this area. He shouldn't have been able to calm royal children trained from birth to distrust strangers. He shouldn't have been there at all. Yet the princes slept soundly against him, their fear completely gone. The security breach had been total, but the outcome defied every expectation. Aiden Thorne hadn't been looking to comfort anyone. The instinct simply rose from somewhere deep, an automatic response to the two small figures trembling in the corridor. His mercenary training had taught him to recognize pure vulnerability, that particular frequency of fear that cuts across all backgrounds. These weren't human children, but the signal they broadcast needed no translation. Their fear was a universal language. His Earth-based pragmatism told him to stay clear. These were alien royals, not refugees from some war-torn border world. They represented complications he didn't need, politics he avoided. Yet their small forms radiated a terror that bypassed all that calculation. It was innocence facing something it couldn't comprehend. His soldier's mind assessed the tactical situation while something older, more fundamental, made the decision for him. The two boys stood frozen, their blue skin emitting a faint, nervous luminescence in the storage chamber's dim light. They should have run from him. Their extensive training, drilled into them since they could walk, would have screamed stranger, outsider, threat. But they didn't. They just stood there staring at the human with wide, luminous eyes, their small chests heaving with panicked breaths. They were lost, and in that moment, species didn't matter. He slowly lowered himself to one knee, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He didn't reach for them. He just made himself available, a solid presence in the chaos. One of them, the slightly taller one, took a hesitant step forward. Then another. The other followed, clutching his brother's sleeve. Aiden's hands were rough from years of handling weapons and machinery, scarred from battles on a dozen different worlds. They were not the soft, pampered hands of a courtier. Yet when he finally rested one gently on the smaller prince's shoulder, the boy didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch instead. The tension drained from his small frame like water. The other prince moved closer, pressing against Aiden's side, seeking the warmth and solidity he offered. They spoke to him in their flowing, melodic language, words that meant nothing to him. But the meaning behind them was clear. It was the same need he'd seen in frightened soldiers and civilians across the galaxy, a need for safety, for a moment of peace. He didn't need to understand their words to understand that. He settled back against a storage crate and they followed, curling against him like planets finding orbit. Their strange, cool skin felt foreign against his, their bioluminescence casting soft shadows on the walls. But their steady breathing, the way their small hands gripped his shirt, that was familiar. It was trust. A complete, unearned, and terrifying trust. In that quiet chamber, his identity shifted. The mercenary, the soldier for hire, the man who moved through worlds without attachments felt the old labels peel away. They were replaced by something simpler, something more ancient. Guardian. The weight of it settled on him not as a burden, but as a fact. This moment, this quiet sanctuary created by a human and two alien princes, stood against centuries of Aeolian tradition. Their entire culture was built on isolation, on suspicion of outsiders, on the absolute purity of their bloodline. Yet here were the heirs to that empire, sleeping soundly against the chest of a species they'd been taught to fear. Their simple, instinctual trust challenged everything. It was a quiet revolution in a dimly lit room. The quiet hiss of Sorella's armor filled the chamber as she towered over the sleeping group. Every plate and joint in her crystalline suit shifted with controlled energy, a low thrum of contained power that made the air itself feel heavy. She stood there for a long moment, a 7-foot-tall monument of royal fury and maternal terror. Her eyes, like cut gemstones, held entire galaxies of rage and fear. They flicked from her son's peaceful faces to the human who held them, then back again. The silence stretched thin and sharp. "You stole my children." Her voice was low, but it carried the full weight of her authority. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation of the highest order, a charge that implied interstellar crime, treason, and violation of the most sacred trust. The words hung there, waiting for denial, for excuses, for the groveling apology she expected from any outsider caught in such a position. Aiden didn't move. He didn't flinch or look away. He simply met her gaze from where he sat, his back against the crate, the two princes still solidly asleep against him. He didn't try to stand or bow or show any of the courtly deference her station demanded. His stillness was different. It was the calm of a man who has faced worse and held his ground. It was a battlefield stillness forged in moments where any wrong move meant death. There was no deceit in his posture, only a weary, watchful confidence. The princes stirred slightly at the sound of their mother's voice, a soft murmur passing between them in their sleep. But they didn't wake. Their small bodies remained relaxed, trusting, utterly secure in the refuge they had found. Their peaceful state was a stark, silent rebuttal to the Queen's accusation of theft. They looked not like captives, but like children who had finally found safe harbor. Around the room, a full squad of royal guards had their energy weapons raised and aimed directly at Aiden. The barrels glowed with a soft, deadly light trained on the center of his chest. The threat was absolute, immediate. Yet the man they targeted made no move to defend himself. His hands remained visible, resting lightly on the boys' backs. He offered no threat, only a steady, unnerving calm. Commander Kess stood slightly behind the Queen, a data scanner in hand, documenting the entire scene. His professional demeanor was etched with clear unease. His scanner recorded the lack of defensive wounds on the children, the human's non-aggressive posture, the bizarre piece of the situation that clashed violently with protocol. His jaw was tight. The evidence wasn't adding up to the crime being alleged. Aiden finally spoke. His voice was flat, gravelly from disuse and entirely without ornament. Kids are kids. He didn't look at the weapons pointed at him. He kept his eyes on the Queen. They needed comfort. I provided it, that was all. No justification. No elaboration. No attempt to frame it as heroic or special. It was a statement of simple, blunt fact. The raw humanity of it, the sheer unvarnished simplicity, cut through centuries of royal protocol and galactic politics. It disarmed her completely. Her fury, her fear, her entire framework of authority, all of it was built on complexity, on layers of tradition and suspicion. His words were a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples stretched far beyond that room. Darian and Elias saw the world through a lens of pure, uncluttered perception. Their royal training had started almost from birth, a constant education in threat recognition and power assessment. They could read the micro-expressions on a courtier's face, sense the slight shift in energy from a guard who was nervous, or identify the faint hum of a weapon powering up 3 rooms away. They were children, but their understanding of danger was anything but childish. The panic flooding the palace corridors was just noise to them. They were looking for a signal. When they first saw Aiden in that dim corridor, their training should have screamed a warning. Outsider, unknown, potential threat. Their instincts, honed by years of drills, told them to retreat, to find a guard, to trigger a hidden alarm. But a deeper instinct, an older one, overrode the training. They saw past the worn clothing, the human features, the foreign scent. They saw the stillness in his posture. Not the stillness of hiding, but the stillness of watching. The stillness of a protector assessing a perimeter. His eyes held no malice, only a weary, sharp awareness. Their calm in the face of the palace-wide emergency wasn't ignorance. It was the product of their unique education. They understood power dynamics on an instinctual level. They knew their mother was the most powerful person in that part of the galaxy. They knew the guards were extensions of her will. But they also understood that power had blind spots. It created fear. It generated protocol. It could not always see what was directly in front of it. Later, when questioned about their lack of fear, Darian's response was simple. Should I be? Everyone is afraid of Mother. It wasn't a boast. It was an observation. He understood that her power inspired fear in others, and that fear often clouded judgment. Elias added his own assessment, his young voice matter-of-fact. She's the most powerful person in this part of the galaxy. He stated it as one would state that the sky was blue. It was a simple fact of their existence, not something to be debated. Their trust in Aiden was not a naive child's mistake. It was a calculated survival decision. In the maze of panic and protocol, they had found a point of stability. They recognized his core nature, protective, pragmatic, solid, beneath the exterior of a tired mercenary. They chose him, not because protocol demanded it, but because their own sharp instincts, the very ones their training had honed, recognized a true guardian. They went against centuries of royal isolation not out of rebellion, but because their deeper education, the one coded into their genes, told them it was the correct tactical move. This wasn't a childish lapse. It was the first real-world application of everything they had been taught, and it signaled a shift in understanding that went far beyond their years. They saw a solution where the adults only saw a problem. Aiden Thorne had not asked for this. The weight of 2 sleeping princes felt heavier than any pack he'd carried. He was a relic from distant Earth, a man whose homeworld was a footnote in galactic politics. He moved through the edges of empires, taking jobs that paid enough to keep moving. He was not a player in royal affairs. He was a tool others used, then discarded. This responsibility settled on him like a too heavy coat. His entire mercenary career had been a lesson in avoiding attachments. Connections were liabilities. Emotional ties got you killed or betrayed. He had learned to travel light, to leave no trace, to be a ghost in the systems he passed through. It was a survival strategy that had worked for years. Yet these 2 children, with their luminous blue skin and strange musical language, had bypassed all his defenses. They triggered an instinct he had sealed away long ago, a deep-seated need to shield the vulnerable. Their alien features meant nothing. The color of their skin, the glow it emitted, the shape of their eyes, none of it registered as a barrier. Fear was the same in any species. It had a specific scent, a particular tremor, a look in the eyes that communicated pure, undiluted terror. He had seen it on human faces, on a dozen different alien species. He saw it on them. His response was not a choice. It was a reflex. Even as he offered comfort, the soldier in him was working. His eyes scanned the chamber, noting the single entrance, the ventilation shafts too small for an adult, the crates that could provide cover. He assessed the guards when they arrived, their stance, their weapon models, their likely response time. He calculated the Queen's probable actions, the political fallout, the escape routes from the palace. His mind was a constant low hum of threat assessment. The palace around him was beautiful, a masterpiece of crystalline architecture and bioluminescent art. But he saw past the beauty. He saw the deadly calculations it concealed. Every corridor was a potential ambush point. Every courtier's smile could hide a knife. This was a world of subtle poisons and quiet betrayals, a game he had no desire to play. He knew that accepting the role of guardian meant stepping directly into the center of that game. It meant making himself a target in a conflict he didn't understand. The danger was unimaginable, a web of intrigue with the princes at its center. But his pragmatism, the very thing that had kept him alive, now became their best defense. He was not swayed by tradition or politics. He saw problems and solutions, threats and counters. The courtly intrigue that swirled around the royal family was just another form of battlefield chaos. He could navigate it because he wasn't trying to win a political argument. He was trying to keep 2 children alive. The unwilling hero, the man who had spent his life running from any kind of permanent responsibility, found himself anchored. The purpose was clear and terrifyingly simple. Protect them. In protecting what others feared, an outsider's influence, a change to their ancient ways, he found a reason to stop running. He found a fight worth having. The princes led him through passages that didn't exist on any palace schematic. Elias's small hand rested on a section of seamless wall in a forgotten sublevel. Only royal blood can open them, he explained, his voice echoing softly in the confined space. The wall remained inert for a moment. Then a soft network of light pulsed beneath its surface, spreading out from the point of contact like veins waking up. A section of the crystal wall shimmered and dissolved, revealing a dark passage that smelled of cool stone and dormant machinery. Inside, the very walls reacted to their presence. They walked through corridors that glowed with a soft internal light, the intensity shifting as they passed. The light wasn't just illumination. It pulsed in complex rhythmic patterns, a visual language responding to the genetic signatures of the 2 boys. Their DNA was the key, a living cipher that activated systems older than the current empire. These weren't merely hidden hallways for escape. They were a network of living history, a record of the Aeolian people coded into the architecture itself. The air hummed with a low, ancient energy, a vibration that spoke of millennia. Aiden's presence should have been a violation. His human biology contained none of the markers these systems were designed to recognize. He was an error, an anomaly that should have triggered silent alarms or lethal security protocols. He felt the scan pass over him, a tingling sensation across his skin as the very air seemed to test his right to be there. He braced for a reaction, his hand instinctively moving closer to the weapon at his hip. The system should have rejected him, sealing him out or neutralizing the intruder. Instead, the light from the walls softened. The humming energy didn't spike in alarm. It seemed to adjust. The glow intensified around the 2 princes, then extended to envelop Aiden in a gentle, accepting aura. The ancient recognition protocols, written in a time long before the Empire's rigid xenophobia took hold, were not just about blood. They were about intent, about loyalty. They recognized the prince's unshakable trust in him. His role as their chosen guardian, validated by their own royal will, was a permission the system understood on a fundamental level. It bypassed the modern prejudices coded into the palace's newer defenses. This acceptance rewrote the rules in real time. It proved that lineage was more than just a genetic sequence. It was memory. It was the trust passed down through generations, a bond that could override even the most sophisticated technological locks. The ancient Aeolians who built these pathways had understood that true security wasn't just about keeping people out. It was about knowing who to let in. Their trust, a simple bond between 2 boys and their protector, became a key that could unlock what all the technology in the galaxy could not breach. The old systems remembered a time when loyalty was the highest form of bloodline. The first wave hit the outer defensive perimeter with silent precision. 20 operatives moved in perfect concert, their approach relayed through encrypted channels from a command ship lurking just outside sensor range. They didn't rush. They advanced with a cold, methodical rhythm, disabling outer alarms with tools that left no energy signature. Their movements spoke of intense preparation and a complete lack of mercy. This was not a raid. It was a clinical extraction. Initial intelligence, pieced together from scanner ghosts and disrupted comms, suggested a much larger force. Up to 50 more operatives were staged in cloaked vessels in high orbit, waiting for the signal to reinforce the initial breach. The scale of the operation was immense, a commitment of resources that signaled far more than a simple kidnapping. This was a targeted strike aimed at the heart of the Aeolian Empire's stability. Removing the princes would create a power vacuum, a crisis of succession that could throw the entire sector into chaos. The Rexians weren't targeting just any royal children. Their assault vectors, their point of entry, their timing, everything was calibrated for the two specific heirs. They bypassed more accessible targets, ignoring rooms filled with priceless artifacts and data cores. Their objective was singular and clear. Their tactics demonstrated an intimate, terrifying knowledge of the palace's architectural weaknesses and security rotation schedules. They knew which guards would be where and when. They knew about maintenance blind spots the security chief had forgotten. Aiden watched the tactical feed over Sorella's shoulder, his eyes scanning the movement patterns. He saw it immediately. These weren't common mercenaries or hired thugs. Their coordination was too tight, their discipline too absolute. They moved like professional soldiers from a unified military force, their actions stripped of any individual flair. Each operative was an extension of a single ruthless will. He recognized the signs from conflicts on a dozen frontier worlds. This was state-sponsored action, deniable and brutal. The attack confirmed his deepest suspicion. His presence had not caused this, but it had certainly accelerated the timeline. The Rexians, or whoever was pulling their strings, had seen a human close to the royal heirs. They saw an opportunity, a new variable to exploit, a potential weak point to pressure. The association itself was a provocation. It made the princes a more urgent target. He turned to the queen, his voice flat and devoid of any attempt to soften the blow. Your sons are now in danger simply by association with me. The statement hung in the command center's tense air. It wasn't an apology. It was a tactical assessment. His outsider status, the very thing that had allowed him to offer comfort outside of protocol, had now become a weapon for their enemies. The line between the prince's personal safety and the political stability of their entire empire dissolved in that moment. They were now the same fight. Protecting the children meant securing the throne. There was no longer any separation between the family and the state. The threat had made them inextricably linked. The hum of the strategy table died. Sorella stood from her command chair. The council members watched her, their expressions a mix of fear and rigid tradition. The air felt thick with unspoken objections. Then she spoke. 7 words that changed the entire direction of the empire. Then they'll have to go through me first. It was a statement of fact, not a boast. It landed in the silent room with the weight of a stone. This was not a queen adhering to custom. This was a mother making a choice. She looked past the centuries of Aeolian protocol, the deep-seated suspicion of outsiders, the entire political framework built on isolation. She looked at the tactical screen showing the Rexian advance, then she looked at Aiden. She saw what her son saw, not a human, not an outsider, a protector. Their trust in him, so absolute and instinctual, became her guide. She chose their judgment over the counsel of her most trusted advisors. Aiden's position in the room shifted instantly. He was no longer the problem to be solved, the security breach to be contained. He became the essential ally, the key asset in a fight for survival. The quiet trust he had built with the princes, that human pacified bond that had seemed so fragile, hardened into an active defense strategy. It was no longer just about comfort. It was about survival. His unique perspective, his lack of ingrained political bias, his raw pragmatism, all of it became invaluable. The court advisors did not accept this shift quietly. One of the elder statesmen, his robes marking generations of service, stood. He spoke of risk. He cited historical precedents of betrayal. He warned against embracing foreign influence, arguing it would weaken the empire's core identity from within. His words were logical, measured, and rooted in centuries of cautious policy. He represented the old way, the safe way, the isolated way. Sorella did not debate him. She did not try to argue the finer points of interspecies relations. She simply turned her head and looked at him. Her crystalline eyes held no anger, only a ruler's absolute certainty. The low thrum of her living armor seemed to intensify. The advisor's words faltered, then stopped. He slowly sat down. Her authority was not up for discussion. She had made her decision. The debate was over. Her physical presence seemed to solidify with her resolve. The armor she wore, a masterpiece of Aeolian technology, appeared more formidable. The light within its crystalline plates pulsed with a sharper, more determined rhythm. It was as if her will was feeding directly into the suit's systems, becoming an extension of her commitment. Her initial fury, that raw maternal rage at her son's disappearance, had been a storm. Now it was a focused beam. This was the transformation. The Queen's fury was reforged into strategic commitment. This was not a temporary measure for a single crisis. It was a fundamental realignment of her leadership. She was betting the entire future of her dynasty, the stability of her empire, on the pragmatic skills of an outsider. She was rejecting the safety of tradition for the necessity of adaptation. It was the biggest gamble a monarch could make. She placed her faith not in armies or ancient protocols, but in the bond between a human soldier and her children. The course was set. He ran his hand over the rack of Aeolian weapons. Most felt alien, their grips and balance designed for larger hands and different strengths. Then his fingers closed around one. The handle was cool, its shape fitting his palm like it was molded for him. The weight was perfect. Not too light, not too heavy. It felt right. He pulled the blade free. It was a short, curved weapon, its edge gleaming with a faint internal light. His human combat instincts, built on years of field experience, recognized a good tool when he found one. It was a fusion of his own practicality and their advanced technology. A weapon like this shouldn't have responded to him. Its activation was keyed to Aeolian genetic markers and royal security clearances. He was an outsider, a human. His touch should have been rejected. The blade should have remained inert, a dead piece of refined crystal. He held it, waiting for the systems to recognize the error. Instead, the edge glowed brighter. A soft hum vibrated up his arm. The energy field along the blade activated with a smooth, instinctual precision. It recognized his intent. It accepted his role. The technology adapted to the user, not just the DNA. He moved through the palace's lower corridors with a soldier's ingrained awareness. His eyes scanned every shadow, every intersection. His ears picked up the faintest echo. His body was a coiled spring ready to pivot, to strike, to defend. He didn't need a map. He understood space in terms of cover, sightlines, and choke points. The palace was just another terrain to navigate. The princes moved with him. They matched his pace without being told, their steps silent on the glowing floor. Their training showed in their discipline. They didn't speak. They used hand signals they'd learned since they could walk. They stayed close, but never too close, always maintaining a defensive formation around him. They were children, but they moved like seasoned recruits. Their education was paying off in real time. Their enhanced senses became an extension of his own battlefield wisdom. Darian's eyes, capable of seeing a wider spectrum of light, would give a slight nod toward a heat signature shimmering behind a wall panel. Elias, attuned to minute thermal shifts, would point a finger toward a vent, barely warmer than the surrounding air. They fed him data his human senses could never detect. He processed it instantly, his mind integrating their alien perception with his own tactical knowledge. Heat, movement, sound. It all merged into a single clear picture of the threat. It was a perfect, unspoken concert of abilities. His reflexes, hardened by countless firefights, reacted to their warnings a split second before a normal person would even register the danger. They moved as one unit. A human pivot was met with an alien sidestep. A silent warning was answered with a raised blade. There was no friction, no miscommunication, just seamless, efficient motion. Human adaptability merged with alien tradition on the move. His way of thinking, direct, pragmatic, solution-oriented, combined with their innate understanding of the environment and their genetically honed skills. He was the strategy. They were the sensors. Together they formed a new kind of fighting unit. It was a hybrid of two different worlds, two different approaches to survival, and it moved with a cohesion that was terrifying to behold. The galaxy had seen soldiers. It had seen royals. It had never seen anything like this. 6 attack vectors hit the garrison. They came from 3 directions at once, a pincer move meant to overwhelm the defenders through sheer coordination. The ancient Aeolian tree fortress was not a single structure, but a network of interlocking chambers and passages carved into a massive living tree. Its design was centuries old, a relic from a time when defense meant using the environment itself. The architecture created natural choke points, narrow passageways, and elevated platforms that favored a small entrenched force over a larger, invading one. The landscape itself was the first line of defense. A voice distorted by a vocal modulator cut through the humid air. "Send out the human and the royal spawn," it demanded, the words echoing off the curved wooden walls. "Do it now, and we might let the rest of you scurry back to your holes." The promise of mercy was a hollow tactic, a psychological play to seed doubt and encourage surrender. They knew the defenders could hear them. The taunt was meant to isolate Aiden and the princes, to turn them into bargaining chips. It had the opposite effect. It solidified their position. Aiden felt the stimulant take hold, a sharp chemical clarity that honed his human reflexes to a razor's edge. The world sharpened. Sound separated into distinct layers. The slight shift of air against his skin registered as movement. His heart rate remained steady, controlled. The drug was a tool, nothing more. It bought him fractions of a second, and in close quarters combat, fractions were everything. He gripped the Aeolian blade, its familiar weight an anchor in the chaos. The princes needed no drugs. Their training took over. They moved without speaking, a silent dance of coordination that required no words. A slight tilt of Darian's head toward a shadowed alcove. A sharp gesture from Elias pointing to a vibration in the floorboards. They fed him information constantly, their enhanced senses painting a detailed picture of the battle space that his human perception could never achieve on its own. They were his early warning system, his peripheral vision extended. The fighting was immediate and brutal. It was claustrophobic, pressed into the tight corridors and small rooms of the tree's interior. There was no room for sweeping maneuvers or long-range weapons. It was about elbows, knees, and the quick, efficient use of a blade. The confined space nullified the Rexians' numerical advantage, forcing them to attack in ones and twos. The defenders held the line at a narrow junction, turning the hallway into a killing funnel. The Rexians relied on modern tactics, coordinated waves, and combat stimulants that made them fast and aggressive. They were professionals, but they were fighting in a space designed by master strategists from a different age. The garrison's layout forced them into predicaments where their technology and numbers meant less. Aiden used the environment like another weapon, leveraging every protrusion and bottleneck. The ancient strategies built on pragmatic defense began to systematically tilt the odds. Their defense was asymmetrical by design. They were not trying to match the Rexians blow for blow. They were letting the attackers waste their strength against the fortress itself. Aiden's strikes were economical, each movement serving a purpose. The princes disrupted advances with precisely thrown knives and well-timed distractions. They fought not as 3 individuals but as a single, multifaceted unit. The professional assassins, trained for open assault, were systematically broken down in the confines of the ancient tree. The resolve of the defenders and the advantage of their position proved decisive. The Rexian assault lost its cohesion. Their initial momentum faltered against the unyielding defense. One by one, their attack vectors were neutralized. The claustrophobic close-quarters fighting they had expected to win quickly became a grinding defeat. The last operative fell not to a spectacular move, but to a simple, pragmatic counterthrust from Aiden's blade. The silence that followed was broken only by the heavy breathing of the victors and the distant hum of the living tree. Pragmatism and discipline had converged. They had won. The communication consoles across the palace flared to life at once. Lord Knox's face filled every screen, his expression a mask of righteous fervor. His voice, stripped of its usual courtly warmth, broadcast a manifesto across all channels, internal and external. The words were not an apology. They were a declaration. He spoke of stagnation, of an empire trapped in the past, of a monarchy that had become an anchor dragging them all down. He painted the royal family, especially the young princes, as symbols of everything that was holding the Aeolian people back from a new age of prosperity. His betrayal explained everything. The precision of the attacks, the intimate knowledge of palace vulnerabilities, the way the Rexians had moved with such specific, devastating coordination. It wasn't just outside intelligence. It was an inside job from a trusted member of the High Court. He had provided the maps, the security schedules, the access codes. The assault on the royal family had been orchestrated with surgical precision because the surgeon was already inside the operating room. Knox didn't just want power for himself. He sought a complete overhaul of the system. He wanted to replace the ancient monarchy with a new form of governance, one far more open to outside influence and trade. He saw the rigid traditions and deep-seated xenophobia of the Aeolian court as a cage. He believed that to survive and thrive, the empire needed to tear down its walls and embrace the galaxy, even if that meant shattering its own foundational structure in the process. His vision was one of radical and violent integration. The conspiracy was not his alone. It reached deep into the very fabric of palace security. His manifesto confirmed the involvement of Rexian mercenaries, Vortan assassin guilds, and powerful corporate factions from neighboring systems. It was a coalition of disparate interests, all united by a single goal: the dismantling of the old Aeolian order. They had coordinated for months, perhaps years, weaving a web of betrayal that extended into the highest levels of the Empire's defense structure. He specifically cited Aiden's presence as the final justification for his revolution. The human's integration into the royal household, his role as protector to the heirs, was the proof Knox needed. He used it as evidence that the old ways were already crumbling, that the Queen was succumbing to outside influence. He framed his violent coup not as treason, but as a necessary counter-revolution to save the Empire's soul from being diluted by foreign elements. He was using the very trust the princes had placed in Aiden as a weapon against their own family. His actions, however, nearly destroyed the very things he claimed he wanted to improve. His alliance with ruthless mercenaries and shadowy guilds threatened to plunge the Empire into a chaos far worse than any stagnation. He was willing to burn the entire structure to the ground on the theory that something better might rise from the ashes. His methods were the opposite of progress. They were a descent into pure anarchy, masked by lofty rhetoric about the future. The resolution of his broadcast was its most chilling aspect. He revealed the true force behind the conspiracy. It was not just a loose collection of dissatisfied factions. It was a formal, organized coalition known as the Alliance of Worlds. This was not a simple rebellion or a palace coup. This was a galactic power struggle. The Alliance represented a collection of species and political entities that saw the rising influence of Earth and the potential Aeolian human alliance as a direct threat to their own established control over the sector. The conflict was instantly reframed. It was no longer a family drama about missing princes and a protective human. It was a proxy war. The attack on the royal family was an opening move in a much larger game. The Aeolian Empire was a key piece on a galactic chessboard, and the Alliance of Worlds was making its play. The princes were targets not just because of their bloodline, but because of what they represented: a future of inclusive cooperation that the Alliance feared. Aiden was a target because he was the living symbol of that future. The personal had become profoundly and dangerously political. Terran worked with a quiet, focused intensity. The betrayal had exposed a deep sickness within the security structure, and his job was to cut it out. He didn't make speeches. He made changes. His approach was practical and thorough, a systematic purge of the vulnerabilities Knox had exploited. Every guard, every servant, every staff member with any access to the royal family was put under a microscope. The screening was more than just a background check. It was a deep psychological and loyalty assessment designed to find any hint of dissent or outside influence. It was a necessary, brutal process. The security protocols weren't just updated. They were rebuilt from the ground up. The new systems were tighter, with more redundancies and overlapping layers of verification, but they were also smarter. They were designed to be adaptive, to learn from attempts to bypass them. Security shifted from a rigid, predictable wall to a living, responsive entity. It could now recognize patterns of behavior that indicated internal threat, not just external force. The entire structure of palace operations was redesigned to prevent the kind of infiltration that had nearly succeeded. The prince's education expanded beyond history and statecraft. Their days now included survival drills and tactical simulations. They learned to identify environmental threats, navigate hostile terrain using their enhanced senses, and make rapid decisions under pressure. It was a harsh but necessary addition to their curriculum. The world had shown them its teeth, and their mother decided they needed to know how to bite back. They were being prepared for the realities of their position, not just the ceremonies. Aiden's integration became official. He was given permanent status as Royal Guardian, a position that came with a formal rank and clear authority. He was no longer a temporary solution or a strange anomaly. He was part of the household. His human perspective, once viewed with such deep suspicion, now provided a valuable counterpoint to centuries of ingrained Aeolian thinking. He saw problems and solutions without the filter of tradition, and the court began slowly to see the value in that. His presence became a fact of life. The old xenophobia didn't vanish overnight, but it began to erode under the weight of necessity. Practical resilience started to replace blind tradition. The courtiers who had whispered about the human outsider now saw how his skills had saved the princes and defended the tree fortress. They saw the strength in the bond he shared with the royal heirs. Suspicion gave way to a grudging respect and then to a quiet acceptance. The empire was changing its definition of strength. The boys solidified this shift with a single phrase. They began to refer to Aiden as their guardian brother in the ancient Aeolian tongue. The term was old, from a time before the empire's isolationist policies took hold. It implied a bond as strong as blood, a level of acceptance that transcended employment or even friendship. It was a title of immense honor and deep personal connection. By using it, they bypassed all the court's lingering doubts and diplomatic formalities. They made his place in their lives undeniable. This shift redefined the entire concept of protection for the Aeolian Empire. It was no longer about building higher walls and keeping everyone out. It became inclusive. It was about knowing who to let in and who to trust. The strength of the empire would now be measured by the quality of its alliances and the depth of its loyalties, not by the purity of its isolation. The core identity of the Aeolians, their resilience, their pride, their deep connection to their history, remained intact. But it was now fortified by a new pragmatic understanding of the galaxy. They had transformed to survive, and in doing so they had found a new kind of strength. Earth's emergence as a stable, influential power sent ripples through the established galactic order. Its ability to form bonds across cultural divides presented a new model, one based on cooperation rather than conquest. This cross-cultural possibility was seen as a direct challenge by older, more rigid powers. The very concept of humans having a voice in interstellar governance was questioned by those who preferred the old hierarchies. Adversaries framed it as an overreach, a species from a backwater world presuming to sit at a table they hadn't built. Aiden became the living symbol of this unwanted shift. He was not a diplomat or a politician. He was a soldier. His successful integration into the most isolated royal court in the sector, his acceptance by the imperial family, and his vital role in protecting the line of succession were all tangible proof. He demonstrated that humanity could not only survive among alien cultures, but could become essential to them. His presence was a refutation of every argument against human involvement in galactic affairs. The Alliance of Worlds saw this and moved to curb the influence by any means necessary. Their strategy was not subtle. They sought to destabilize the Aeolian Empire, to create a power vacuum they could control. They understood that by eliminating or controlling the direct line of succession, they could shatter the human-Aeolian alliance before it truly began. Their use of Rexian mercenaries, assassin guilds, and corporate interests was a multi-pronged approach designed for maximum disruption. Their aggression, however, had an unintended consequence. It confirmed Aiden's strategic importance beyond any doubt. The fact that a coalition of major galactic powers saw one human guardian as a threat to their entire power structure elevated his role. He was no longer just a protector of two boys. He was a key player in a sector-wide struggle for influence. The attacks meant to remove him only solidified his position and made his safety a primary objective for the Empire. The princes understood the stakes with a clarity that belied their years. They had seen the attacks. They knew the Alliance wanted Aiden gone. Their response was not born from childish affection alone. It was a calculated political stance. One of them looked at their mother in the Security Council, his young face serious. "We won't let them take him," he stated. It was a simple vow, but its implications were profound. This declaration transformed a personal bond into an act of political defiance. It was the royal heirs, the very symbols of Aeolian tradition, publicly vowing to protect an outsider against a coalition of external powers. Their loyalty overrode centuries of political caution. It sent a clear message to the Alliance of Worlds and every other watching faction. The personal allegiance between a human and two alien princes had become a foundational pillar of the Empire's new foreign policy. It was a line drawn in the sand. The protector had become the protected, and his safety was now a matter of state. Aidan Thorne stopped running. For years he had moved from one conflict to another, his path a constant retreat from Earth's bitter memories. His mind was a catalogue of wars fought, of difficult choices made in the heat of battle, of faces he'd rather forget. He told himself he was a free agent, but the truth was simpler. He was escaping. His life was a series of contracts, each one a step further away from the person he used to be. He moved through the galaxy like a ghost, leaving no trace, forming no bonds. It was a strategy that worked until it didn't. This new purpose demanded he stop looking back. The role of guardian wasn't a job he could quit when the credits cleared. It was a permanent shift in direction. The prince's safety required his full attention, his entire focus aimed at the threats ahead, not the regrets behind. He had to face forward. There was no other option. Their lives depended on his ability to be present, to be anchored in the now. The past was a luxury he could no longer afford. He found an unexpected sense of belonging in this alien world. The Aeolian Empire was a place of deep tradition fused with startling innovation. The crystalline spires of the palace stood beside bioluminescent data streams. Ancient rituals were performed using technology he couldn't begin to understand. It was a hybrid culture, and he a hybrid creature within it, a human soldier integrated into an alien royal household. He was an outsider, yet he had a defined place. It was the first home that had felt solid in a very long time. His soldier skills, honed for survival and violence, found a higher purpose. The same instincts that once identified enemy positions now tracked the prince's movements in a crowded hall. The strategic mind that planned assaults now designed defense perimeters around their quarters. His ability to assess threats, to move with silent efficiency, to endure hardship, all of it was redirected. These tools were no longer just for keeping himself alive. They were for protecting something beyond himself. The prince's absolute trust began to heal wounds he hadn't even acknowledged. Their calm acceptance, their lack of fear in his presence acted on him like a slow, steady pressure. It sealed over old fractures in his spirit he'd learned to ignore. The weight of their faith was a counterbalance to the weight of his past actions. They looked at him and saw a protector. Gradually, he started to see that too. It was a quiet mending. He became essential to a family, not just a contract. The dynamic was unfamiliar. His value was no longer measured in credits or completed objectives. It was measured in the prince's safety, in the queen's grudging respect, in the smooth functioning of a household that had accepted his presence. He was a fixed point in their lives. They relied on him. That reliance created a bond stronger than any employment agreement. It was a connection based on need and trust. A far cry from the transactional relationships he was used to. The galaxy, which had once been a series of waypoints on an escape route, now offered him a future worth building. He saw a path forward that didn't involve constantly moving on. There was stability here. There was a cause. There were people who mattered more than the mission or the political objectives. He could put down roots in this strange soil and see what grew. It was a possibility he had stopped allowing himself to consider. He realized the fundamental shift. He was no longer running away from his past. He was running toward something. He was moving toward a purpose, a family, a home. The direction of his life had reversed completely. The horizon before him was no longer empty. It was filled with responsibility and connection. The reluctant hero let the old identity fall away. He stopped fighting the role. He stopped seeing himself as a temporary fix or an accidental guardian. He embraced the duty completely. The man who had spent his life avoiding attachments now stood firmly in the center of one. He was Aidan Thorne, guardian brother to the Aeolian princes. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Queen Sorella stood at the observation window, the starfield beyond reflecting in her crystalline eyes. Her duty as a monarch pulled one way. Her responsibility as a mother pulled another. The two forces created a constant low hum of tension deep within her. Her royal obligations were clear. They demanded adherence to tradition, the strict protocols that had safeguarded their isolation for centuries. Her son's happiness presented a different path, one that defied every rule she had sworn to uphold. Their trust in the human was the heart of the conflict. It was an impossibility that challenged everything she understood about her young princes. They were trained from birth to recognize threats, to maintain a cautious distance from outsiders, yet they had extended complete trust to an unknown human. This sent a distinct chill through her. It was a breach of protocol so fundamental, it felt like a structural crack in the very foundation of her rule. The scene of them sleeping on his chest was an image she couldn't erase. She feared the human influence. Aiden represented an unknown variable, a cultural wildcard from a species that was the source of much controversy in recent council sessions. His presence threatened to introduce unpredictable elements into the rigid structure of her court. Yet she couldn't deny the value of the protection he offered. He had proven his worth against the Rexian assault. His skills were real. His commitment was undeniable. Her children were safer with him than with a full squad of her most elite guards. The practical benefit clashed violently with centuries of ingrained policy. Her children had made a choice against all expectation. They had looked past species, past tradition, past every lesson drilled into them, and chosen their guardian based on an instinct she couldn't perceive. This wasn't a childish whim. It was a calculated decision, and it carried a weight she had to respect. They saw something in him that her advisors, bound by courtly thinking, could not. She observed them closely in the days that followed. Aiden's presence didn't make them weaker or dilute their Aeolian identity. It did the opposite. It made them stronger. They stood taller, their focus sharpened. They moved with more confidence, their training enhanced by his quiet, practical guidance. They were becoming resilient, adaptable leaders, not just sheltered royalty. He was giving them tools the palace never could. The empire itself needed this adaptability to survive. The Rexian attack and Nox's betrayal were not isolated incidents. They were the first tremors of a larger quake. The coming threats would require more than just higher walls and stronger weapons. They would require new ways of thinking, new alliances, a flexibility that their ancient isolation had forbidden. Sticking to the old ways was a sure path to extinction. She had to lead this change without losing the essential values that defined her people. Their strength, their resilience, their deep connection to history, these things were not negotiable. But the methods of preservation had to evolve. The definition of protection needed to expand. She couldn't let fear of the new paralyze them. She had to integrate the human strengths without sacrificing their own. The council pressed her. They cited the risks, the da polo trentong, the fear it would generate among the traditionalist factions. They argued for a return to the safe isolation of the past. She listened to their concerns, her face impassive. Then she gave her answer. Her voice held no room for debate. Then they can fear from a distance. Aiden stays. It was a clear line. She had made her choice. She chose the inclusive protection of a proven guardian over the brittle authority of isolated tradition. The safety of her children and the future of her empire would not be sacrificed to old fears. The term was ancient, a phrase that hadn't been spoken in Aeolian royal circles for more than 1,000 years. It wasn't a title granted by decree. It was an acknowledgement offered from the heart. When the princes began to refer to Aiden as their guardian brother, using the old tongue of their ancestors, the entire dynamic shifted. The words carried a weight that bypassed all formal structures. This was no longer about employment or a contract for protection. It was about blood-level acceptance, a bond that ran as deep as lineage itself. This new status gave Aiden a position no outsider had ever held in the recorded history of the empire. He wasn't a hired guard or a diplomatic attendant. He was family. The term placed him within the inner circle of the royal household, granting him an authority and an influence that would have been impossible to achieve through any official channel. It was a promotion that came not from the queen or her council, but from her children. Their word was enough. This direct familial acknowledgement completely bypassed the court's complex protocols and rigid diplomatic processes. There were no committees to approve it, no treaties to sign, no lengthy debates about the implications for interspecies relations. The boys simply stated a fact, and the fact became reality. Their will, expressed through this ancient term, cut through centuries of bureaucracy and xenophobic policy. It was a quiet revolution in the form of 2 words. The princes understood the immense weight of what they were offering. They were not naive children bestowing a cute nickname. Their training had included extensive lessons on Aeolian history and the significance of language. They knew the term guardian brother had not been used since a time before their empire closed its borders. They knew it implied a sacred trust, a bond that was meant to be unbreakable. Their offer was deliberate, a conscious choice to elevate Aiden to a status that matched the depth of their trust. Their enhanced senses played a key role in this decision. They could perceive subtleties in a person's biosignature that others missed. They could detect the slightest fluctuation in body heat, the minute changes in scent that indicated stress or deception. When they focused on Aiden, they didn't just see a human. They sensed his genuine commitment. They felt the steady, unwavering certainty of his protective instinct. Their trust was not given blindly. It was a confirmation of what their unique perception told them was true. They forged a connection that was stronger than species or planet of origin. The bond was not based on shared biology or a common culture. It was built on shared experience, on survival, on the quiet moments of understanding that happen between people who rely on each other in life and death situations. It was a connection that ignored the vast differences between a human mercenary from Earth and 2 alien princes from a crystalline fortress. Those differences became irrelevant. Their absolute trust rewrote ancient definitions of family on the spot. For the Aeolians, family had always been about bloodline, about genetic purity and royal succession. It was a closed system, a circle that rarely allowed new entries. The princes expanded that circle. They demonstrated that family could also be about chosen loyalty, about the bonds forged through action and unwavering trust. They showed that lineage was not just something you were born into. It was something you could build. The concept of lineage itself was forever changed. It was no longer just a matter of genetics and historical Jilu. It now included the profound strength of loyalty that is chosen and earned. The royal family grew that day. It didn't grow through birth or marriage. It grew through a conscious decision to include someone who had proven his worth not through his blood, but through his character. The guardian was now a brother. The outsider was now family. The definition of what it meant to be Aeolian had just gotten larger. One human guardian shifted the foundations of sector politics. Aiden Thorne's presence in the Aeolian court challenged borders that had stood for 1,000 years. His acceptance by the royal family created a new reality that older powers could not ignore. The very idea of a human holding such a trusted position with an isolated monarchy sent ripples through diplomatic channels. Established alliances felt the ground move beneath them. The old order began to look fragile. Trade arrangements across the sector faced immediate and inevitable renegotiation. Long-standing agreements built on the assumption of Aeolian isolation were now obsolete. Merchant guilds and corporate interests saw both risk and opportunity in the new alignment. Routes that had been closed for centuries were now potential corridors for exchange. The economic map of the region was being redrawn in real time, and everyone wanted a say in the new boundaries. The Alliance of Worlds mobilized against this shift with full force. They saw the human-Aeolian bond as a direct threat to their own influence. Their coalition, a mix of species and factions that preferred a static galaxy, moved to counter the change. They used mercenaries, economic pressure, and political manipulation to try and break the new alliance. Their goal was to reassert the old divisions, to push humanity back to the periphery and reinforce the walls around the Aeolian Empire. Other species watched the situation with intense interest. They observed how Aeolia handled the integration of a human into their most sensitive security and family structures. The success or failure of this experiment would set a precedent. It would show whether cross-species cooperation on this level was viable or a dangerous fantasy. Every decision Queen Sorella made was analyzed. Every move Aiden Thorne made was scrutinized. They were a test case for the entire sector. Queen Sorella became a symbol of adaptive leadership under pressure. Her decision to protect Aiden despite the immense risks demonstrated a ruler willing to place pragmatism above tradition. She defended her choice against internal doubt and external threats. Her stance showed that a leader could embrace change without losing core values. She became a figure of interest far beyond her own borders. a monarch navigating uncharted political waters. The princes represented the new generation's potential for inclusive rule. Their trust in Aiden signaled a clear departure from the xenophobia of their ancestors. They were not breaking with tradition so much as building a new one, based on loyalty and capability rather than pure bloodline. They embodied a future where leadership could be more flexible, more responsive to the realities of a connected galaxy. Earth's status elevated from a peripheral note in galactic affairs to an essential player. Humanity was no longer just another species on the edge of settled space. The successful integration of one of their own into a powerful royal household proved their potential as allies. This changed how diplomats, traders, and military strategists viewed the entire human race. Earth was now a factor in every major calculation. A quiet but profound shift began to occur across the galaxy. The concept of personal allegiance started to override centuries of political caution. The bond between Aiden and the princes demonstrated that trust could be a more powerful foundation for an alliance than a carefully negotiated treaty. Other factions took note. They saw that strength could come from unity, not just from isolation or dominance. The Protector became a living symbol of cross-species possibility. Aiden Thorne was no longer just a man doing a job. He was proof that beings from different worlds, with different biologies and histories, could form bonds strong enough to change the fate of empires. His presence in the heart of the Aeolian court was a statement. It showed that the future might be built on cooperation, not conquest. The Guardian had become the message. The victory at the Tree Fortress settled like dust after a storm, but it left a bitter taste. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. The Rexian assault had been a probe, a testing of defenses meant to gather data, not achieve total victory. The real conflict was just starting. The Alliance of Worlds had not committed their full strength. They had merely extended a single finger to test the waters. Now they knew the temperature. The failure of their initial attack would not deter them. It would only make them more determined. Their efforts would escalate in scope and ferocity. They had analyzed the Aeolian response, studied the defenders' tactics, and identified the new variables in their calculations. The next move would not be another simple mercenary strike. It would be a coordinated, multifaceted assault designed to overwhelm and dismantle the Empire's stability from multiple angles simultaneously. Aiden's role as the Prince's protector made them larger targets than ever before. His presence was a beacon, a clear symbol of the human influence the Alliance sought to eliminate. By safeguarding the heirs, he concentrated the threat onto them. Their safety was now intrinsically linked to his, and that made their position more dangerous and more politically charged. They were no longer just royal children. They were the focal point of a galactic ideological struggle, yet they were now better equipped to face this danger than any royal heirs in Aeolian history. Their education had been violently expanded beyond court etiquette and historical doctrine. They understood combat, could read tactical displays, and could move through a battlefield with a soldier's awareness. Their enhanced senses, once trained for ceremony, were now honed for survival. They were not passive charges to be protected. They were active participants in their own defense. The fragile human galactic alliance was about to face its ultimate test. The bond between Aiden and the royal family was no longer a personal matter. It was the foundation of a new political reality, and the alliance was determined to shatter it. They would pressure the Empire on every front, economically, militarily, and diplomatically, attempting to force a fracture. The strength of this untested coalition would be pushed to its absolute limit. Old enemies of the Aeolian Empire would see this new vulnerability as a prime opportunity. Rival houses, marginalized guilds, and species with long-held grudges would likely throw their support behind the alliance, eager to benefit from the Empire's potential downfall. The conflict would not remain a clean fight between two defined sides. It would attract opportunists and amplify long-simmering resentments, creating a more complex and treacherous battlefield. The successful defense of the Tree Fortress had proven their tactical capability against a direct attack. It demonstrated that the hybrid unit of human and Aeolian could work with lethal efficiency, but it also revealed the strategic challenge ahead. Defending a fixed position was one thing. Enduring a prolonged, multi-front campaign of attrition and political subversion was another. The siege was a single battle won. The war would be a much longer, darker affair. They stood ready. Aiden's posture was different now. The reluctance was gone, replaced by a hard acceptance. He reviewed security schematics with the Queen, his suggestions sharp and direct. He walked the palace corridors with the princes, his eyes constantly moving, assessing. The weight of the coming conflict was evident, but it did not bow his shoulders. It straightened them. The man who had once run from responsibility now stood firm at the head of it. He led the charge not because he was ordered to, but because he had chosen to. The guardian brother had found his fight, and he would see it through. The horizon was dark with approaching storms, but they faced it together, a united front against whatever came next. Aiden Thorne showed that courage doesn't have a species or a flag. It's a choice to stand between danger and the vulnerable. His protection of the princes wasn't born of duty or strategy. It came from a simple human response. He saw fear in their eyes and chose to act. The future of the galaxy now hinges on these unexpected connections, alliances built not on treaties but on shared trust. Real safety often arrives from the most unlikely sources, a weary soldier from a distant world, offering shelter without a single demand. Protection found them,